A night to celebrate. Michelle Anderson adjusted her jacket as she walked down the courthouse steps, her heart swelling with pride. Today wasn't just a win in the courtroom. It was a testament to her perseverance, her ability to turn adversity into triumph. The justice she had secured for a young single mother wrongfully fired from her job brought a deep sense of satisfaction. Michelle had spent months preparing for the case, sacrificing sleep, personal time, and any semblance of normalcy. As the city buzzed around her, she allowed herself a rare moment of indulgence. "Tonight, I celebrate," Michelle said aloud, her voice firm with resolve. She had her eye on a particular restaurant, Étoile Bistro. Known for its gourmet dishes and chic ambience, it was a haven for the city's elite. She had passed by it many times, promising herself that one day she would savor a meal there. Tonight, fresh off a courtroom victory, seemed like the perfect opportunity. Michelle's car, a modest yet sleek black sedan, hummed to life as she slid into the driver's seat. The drive downtown was brisk, the evening lights casting a golden glow over the streets. As she neared the restaurant, a smile spread across her face. She had called ahead the night before and secured a reservation. Parking her car, Michelle stepped out, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. Her tailored suit hugged her figure, and her natural curls framed her face. She exuded an air of poise and success, her dark skin glowing under the warm streetlights. The restaurant was everything she imagined, its grand exterior adorned with soft lights and intricate ironwork. As she approached the door, Michelle couldn't help but notice the stream of well-dressed patrons entering with ease, their laughter and chatter spilling into the night. Stepping inside, the atmosphere enveloped her. The faint notes of jazz floated through the air, mingling with the clinking of glasses and murmured conversations. The maitre d', a middle-aged man with an impeccable suit and a clipboard in hand, glanced at her briefly before returning to his list. "Good evening," Michelle greeted, her voice warm yet professional. "I have a reservation under the name Anderson." The maitre d' raised an eyebrow, his eyes scanning her before looking back at the list. "Anderson," he repeated, his tone clipped. "Yes, Michelle Anderson, reserved for 7 p.m. The man hesitated, flipping through his list with exaggerated slowness. Finally, he looked up, his expression guarded. "I don't see a reservation under that name." Michelle frowned slightly. "That's strange. I made the reservation last night, confirmed with someone on the phone." "Are you sure it was this restaurant?" the maitre d' asked, his voice carrying a faint edge of condescension. Michelle inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. "Yes, I'm certain." The man gave a tight-lipped smile. "I'm sorry, but without a reservation, I can't guarantee a table. We're fully booked this evening." Michelle's eyes drifted past him to the dining area. There were several empty tables, their white linens gleaming under the dim lights. Her stomach tightened, but she maintained her polite tone. "I see that there are open tables. I don't mind waiting if that's necessary." The maitre d's expression hardened. "Those tables are reserved. We can't accommodate walk-ins at this time." Michelle caught the way his gaze flickered over her, how his lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed like this. Despite her tailored suit, her polished demeanor, and her success, there were still places where she was reduced to an outsider. "Perhaps I could speak with the manager," she asked calmly. The maitre d' stiffened. "The manager is unavailable at the moment." Michelle took a moment to steady herself. Years of courtroom battles had taught her how to keep her emotions in check, even when faced with blatant disrespect. "I understand," she said, her voice measured. "But I'd like the manager to know that I'll be following up about this experience." With that, she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Placing it on the stand, she looked the maitre d' directly in the eye. "Feel free to pass this along." The man glanced at the card, his brow furrowing as he read the embossed text. "Michelle Anderson, Esquire, Civil Rights Attorney." Before he could respond, Michelle turned on her heel and walked out, her head held high. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped outside, but the sting of humiliation burned hotter. Driving home, Michelle's mind replayed the interaction. It wasn't the first time she had been judged unfairly, but tonight's incident struck a deeper chord. After years of breaking barriers and proving her worth in a world that often underestimated her, she had hoped that moments like this would be behind her. But they weren't. The memories of past slights and struggles surfaced unbidden. Professors who doubted her potential in law school, colleagues who questioned her competence, and countless microaggressions in her personal and professional life. "I'm not just angry," Michelle whispered to herself. "I'm tired." Pulling into her driveway, she sat in her car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel. She thought about the people she had fought for in the courtroom, people who faced injustices far worse than being denied a table at a restaurant. They had inspired her to keep going, to channel her frustration into action. This time would be no different. As Michelle stepped into her home, she kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch. Her eyes wandered to the framed photographs on her mantel, her graduation, her first major case victory, and a group photo of her legal team celebrating another hard-fought win. Each picture was a reminder of her resilience, her ability to turn challenges into triumphs. By the time she went to bed, Michelle had a plan. Tomorrow, she wouldn't simply demand an apology. She would do something more profound, something that would leave a lasting impact, not just on the restaurant, but on the broader community. Her career had taught her that moments of injustice, no matter how small, could be catalysts for change. And Michelle Anderson was no stranger to fighting for what was right. A plan in motion. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Michelle's home as she sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The events of the previous night lingered in her mind, stirring a mixture of frustration and determination. She had spent years building her reputation as a skilled and compassionate civil rights attorney, yet one glance from a maitre d' had reduced her to a stereotype. This wasn't about a missed meal or wounded pride. This was about something bigger, a systemic problem that went beyond her own experiences. As she took a sip of her coffee, Michelle's resolve solidified. She wasn't going to let this incident pass quietly. Pulling her laptop closer, she opened her calendar. Her schedule was packed with court appearances, client meetings, and community outreach events, but she was determined to carve out time for this. She opened a blank document and began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. 2 hours later, Michelle leaned back in her chair, rereading the letter she had drafted. It was addressed to Henry Wallace, the owner of Étoile Bistro, whose name she had discovered through a quick internet search. The letter was firm but professional, detailing her experience at the restaurant and emphasizing the broader implications of such discrimination. She read the final lines aloud. "As a society, we must confront the implicit biases that perpetuate inequality. Incidents like these are not isolated. They are part of a larger pattern that affects countless individuals every day. I urge you to reflect on this and take meaningful steps to ensure that your establishment truly welcomes all patrons, regardless of their appearance. I would be happy to meet with you and your staff to discuss these issues further and explore solutions that can make a real difference." Satisfied, Michelle saved the document and printed a copy. She folded the letter neatly and slid it into an envelope, writing the restaurant's address on the front. This was only the beginning. Later that day, Michelle walked into her office, greeted by her paralegal, Sarah. "Morning, Michelle," Sarah said, handing her a stack of files. "You've got a full day ahead." But she paused, studying Michelle's face. "You seem focused. Did something happen?" Michelle hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Something did happen, and I'm going to address it." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Anything I can help with?" "Actually, yes," Michelle said, setting her bag down. "Can you look into anti-discrimination training programs? I want to find an expert who can work with a business to address implicit bias and racial equity." Sarah's curiosity was piqued, but she didn't press for details. "Of course, I'll pull some options for you by the end of the day." As Sarah left the room, Michelle opened her laptop and began drafting an email. She had decided to reach out to a local journalist who had covered racial discrimination in businesses. The journalist, Claire Davis, had a reputation for shedding light on such stories and amplifying voices that often went unheard. Michelle typed quickly, "Dear Ms. Davis, I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to bring to your attention an incident that occurred last night at D'Etoile Bistro, an upscale restaurant in our city. While I was personally affected by the discriminatory treatment, my goal is not to seek retribution, but to highlight a broader issue that impacts many individuals. I believe this story has the potential to spark meaningful conversations about bias and inclusion in public spaces. If you're interested, I'd be happy to provide more details and discuss how we can use this moment as an opportunity for education and change." Satisfied, Michelle hit send and leaned back in her chair. She knew there was no guarantee Claire would take up the story, but it was a step in the right direction. The next morning, Michelle received a call from an unknown number. "Ms. Anderson, this is Henry Wallace, the owner of D'Etoile Bistro," came the voice on the other end. Michelle's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Good morning, Mr. Wallace," she said, her tone professional. "I received your letter," he began, his voice tinged with discomfort. "I want to apologize for what happened. That is not the image we want to project at D'Etoile Bistro." Michelle listened carefully, noting the sincerity in his tone, but also the guardedness. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Wallace, but this isn't just about an apology. It's about ensuring that such incidents don't happen again. Not to me, and not to anyone else." There was a pause on the line before Wallace spoke again. "I agree. I'd like to invite you to meet with me and my management team to discuss how we can address this issue. We clearly need to do better." Michelle considered his words. She could hear the tension in his voice, but also a genuine willingness to engage. "I'd be willing to meet," she said, "but I also want to involve an expert in anti-discrimination training. It's important that this conversation leads to actionable steps." "Understood," Wallace replied. "Let's schedule a meeting. I'll make sure my staff is prepared to listen and learn." As Michelle ended the call, she felt a flicker of hope. This was more than she had expected. A chance to turn a negative experience into an opportunity for growth and change. That afternoon, Claire Davis called. "Ms. Anderson, thank you for reaching out," Claire said, her voice warm yet professional. "I read your email, and I'd like to cover your story. But more than that, I'd like to follow the process of how you and the restaurant address this issue. It could be a powerful example of how we confront bias and promote inclusion." Michelle was surprised but pleased. "That sounds like exactly what I hoped for. If Mr. Wallace agrees, I'd be happy to have you involved." "I'll reach out to him and coordinate," Claire said. "This could be a turning point, Michelle. Thank you for being willing to share your experience." As Michelle hung up, she felt a swell of emotions. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it held the promise of something meaningful. By sharing her story and working with the restaurant, she could help shine a light on issues that many try to ignore. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one meal. It was about challenging a mindset, fostering understanding, and building a better community, one conversation at a time. A plan in motion. Michelle's determination grew as the pieces of her plan began to fall into place. She knew this was about more than just her. It was about creating a ripple effect of change. She didn't want to just confront the restaurant about their behavior. She wanted to turn it into a moment of education and awareness for everyone involved. After her call with Henry Wallace and her conversation with Claire Davis, Michelle returned to her desk. She began researching more about bias in the hospitality industry. The statistics she found were both sobering and motivating. Studies revealed that people of color, especially Black patrons, were often treated differently in high-end establishments, subtly or overtly excluded from the spaces that prided themselves on exclusivity. Michelle's own experience had been a stark reminder of how far society still had to go. She didn't just want D'Etoile Bistro to change. She wanted to set an example that other businesses could follow. That afternoon, Sarah returned with a list of organizations and consultants specializing in diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) training. "Here's what I found," Sarah said, handing Michelle a folder. "There's a local nonprofit, Equity Alliance, that conducts workshops on implicit bias. They've worked with businesses across the city, and their reviews are stellar. They even have a program tailored for the hospitality industry." Michelle flipped through the information, impressed by the breadth of services offered. She made a note to contact them later. "Great work, Sarah," Michelle said with a nod. "This is exactly what I need." As Sarah left the office, Michelle picked up the phone and dialed Equity Alliance. The director of the nonprofit, Vanessa Morales, answered the call. Her voice was calm and assured, exuding a sense of purpose. "Ms. Anderson, thank you for reaching out," Vanessa said after Michelle explained the situation. "What you've described is unfortunately all too common, but I commend you for wanting to address it in a constructive way. We'd be happy to work with you and the restaurant to implement meaningful change." Michelle felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Vanessa. I want this to be about more than just an apology or a PR move. I want to see real understanding and growth come from this." "That's exactly our goal," Vanessa assured her. "We'll tailor a workshop to address the specific challenges at T12 Bistro. I can also provide a framework for ongoing education, so the changes stick long after this initial effort." Michelle and Vanessa scheduled a time to discuss the details further. As she hung up the phone, Michelle felt a sense of momentum building. The next step was to ensure that Henry Wallace and his team were fully committed. She drafted an email to Wallace, outlining her conversation with Vanessa and the proposed training. "Dear Mr. Wallace, thank you for your willingness to address the issue we discussed. I've connected with a highly reputable organization, Equity Alliance, which specializes in addressing implicit bias and fostering inclusive environments. They are ready to work with your team to conduct a training session and provide ongoing support. This effort is not just about correcting what happened, but about setting a standard for your business and others like it. I believe that together we can create a meaningful impact. Please let me know if you're open to moving forward with this plan. Sincerely, Michelle Anderson." She hit send and leaned back in her chair. This was no small undertaking, but she was determined to see it through. Later that evening, Claire Davis called again with an update. "I spoke with Henry Wallace," Claire said. "He's agreed to let me document this process. He seems genuinely remorseful and eager to do the right thing." "That's good to hear," Michelle said, relieved. "But I want to be transparent," Claire continued. "This story could draw attention, and not all of it will be positive. There may be backlash from people who think this is unnecessary or who don't understand the deeper issues at play. Are you prepared for that?" Michelle took a deep breath. She had faced criticism and opposition before, both in her career and personal life. She knew this would be no different. "I'm prepared," she said firmly. "This is too important to let fear hold me back." The following day, Michelle received a response from Henry Wallace. "Dear Ms. Anderson, thank you for your email and for taking the time to connect with Equity Alliance. I've reviewed the information you provided and fully support this initiative. I've also spoken with my staff to prepare them for the upcoming training. I want to express my gratitude for your willingness to work with us. Your approach has been both professional and inspiring, and I am committed to ensuring that T12 Bistro becomes a place where all patrons feel welcome and valued. Best regards, Henry Wallace." Michelle felt a wave of relief and pride. Wallace's response was a promising sign that her efforts were making an impact. She picked up her phone and called Vanessa Morales to finalize the workshop details. They agreed on a date and structure for the session, which would include interactive exercises, personal stories, and actionable strategies for fostering inclusivity. By the end of the week, everything was in place. Michelle sat in her office, reflecting on how much had happened in such a short time. What had started as a painful moment of discrimination was now evolving into an opportunity for education and transformation. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A message from Claire Davis. "Hi Michelle, I've drafted the initial article about your experience and the steps being taken at Étoile Bistro. I'd like you to review it before it goes live. Let me know your thoughts." Michelle opened the document, her heart racing slightly as she began to read. The article was thoughtful and balanced, capturing not just her story, but the broader significance of addressing implicit bias in public spaces. She felt a swell of gratitude for everyone who had supported her in this effort: Sarah, Vanessa, Claire, and even Henry Wallace. This was just the beginning, but it was a beginning that mattered. As she closed her laptop for the day, Michelle allowed herself a small smile. Change was never easy, but it was always worth fighting for. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. Confronting the system. The morning of the scheduled training at Étoile Bistro was crisp and bright, but Michelle's mind was anything but clear. She had spent the night before rehearsing what she would say, ensuring her words struck a balance between conviction and compassion. This wasn't just about reprimanding the staff. It was about opening their eyes to the lived realities of people who experienced discrimination daily. She arrived at the restaurant just after 9 a.m., a time chosen deliberately to avoid the usual hustle of lunch service. The bistro was uncharacteristically quiet, its elegant dining room devoid of its usual chatter and clinking glasses. Instead, rows of chairs had been set up in front of a makeshift podium, and a projector screen stood in the corner, displaying the Equity Alliance logo. Henry Wallace was already there, pacing near the podium. His face lit up when he saw Michelle. "Ms. Anderson, thank you for coming," he said, his tone earnest. "I've gathered the entire staff, including management. Vanessa Morales from Equity Alliance will be here shortly." Michelle gave a polite nod. "Thank you, Mr. Wallace. This is an important step." Wallace hesitated, his hands clasping nervously. "I want you to know, I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night. I can't undo what happened, but I'm committed to making sure it never happens again. Not here, not under my watch." Michelle studied his expression, noting the sincerity in his eyes. Acknowledging the issue is the first step. Now, it's about putting in the work. Just then, Vanessa Morales entered, carrying a laptop and a stack of folders. She greeted Michelle warmly before setting up her materials. Soon, the staff began to trickle in: servers, hostesses, kitchen workers, and even the maitre d' who had dismissed Michelle that fateful evening. The atmosphere was tense as the employees took their seats. Some looked genuinely curious, others seemed apprehensive, and a few appeared openly defensive. Michelle felt a familiar pang in her chest as she saw the maitre d'. She wasn't here to humiliate him, but she hoped he would leave this session with a new perspective. Vanessa began the session with a short introduction. She spoke about the goals of the workshop and emphasized that it wasn't about pointing fingers, but about fostering awareness and growth. "Bias is something we all carry," Vanessa said, her voice calm and measured. "It's shaped by our experiences, our environment, and the systems we live in. But acknowledging it is the first step toward breaking free from it." She handed out a worksheet titled Unpacking Bias, which included scenarios for the staff to discuss. Michelle watched as the employees worked through the examples, their faces ranging from contemplative to defensive. One scenario described a server who assumed a group of young black men couldn't afford a high-priced meal, leading them to provide slower service. Another involved a hostess prioritizing seating for patrons who looked the part over others. Michelle could see the discomfort ripple through the room as some of the staff recognized their own behavior in the examples. Vanessa didn't let the group off easy. She facilitated discussions that forced them to confront hard truths, using statistics, real-life stories, and interactive exercises to drive home the point. At one point, Vanessa turned to Michelle. "Ms. Anderson, would you like to share your experience?" Michelle stood, feeling the weight of the moment. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the staff members. "Thank you, Vanessa," she began. I want to start by saying that my goal here isn't to shame anyone. My goal is to share my perspective and, hopefully, help you understand why this matters." She recounted the events of that night, not just the refusal of service, but the way she had been made to feel invisible and unworthy despite her accomplishments. "I'm not just a lawyer," Michelle continued. "I'm a daughter, a sister, and a community member. Like many people of color, I've worked twice as hard to be seen as equal in spaces where I've often felt unwelcome." That night wasn't just about me being turned away from a table. It was a reminder of the barriers that still exist in our society. The room was silent. Even the maitre d' looked uncomfortable, his usual air of authority replaced by a furrowed brow and downcast eyes. "Bias doesn't always look like hatred," Michelle said, her voice steady but firm. "Sometimes it's as subtle as a glance, a hesitation, or a misplaced assumption. But those small actions add up. They tell people like me that no matter how hard we work or how much we achieve, we're still other." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "I'm here because I believe we can do better. Not just for me, but for every person who walks through these doors expecting to be treated with dignity." The rest of the session included role-playing exercises and practical strategies for addressing bias in real time. Vanessa encouraged the staff to share their own experiences and misconceptions, creating an open and honest dialogue. By the end of the workshop, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The initial tension had given way to a sense of reflection, and even the most resistant staff members seemed to have softened. As the session wrapped up, Henry Wallace stood to address the group. "I want to thank Ms. Anderson and Vanessa Morales for being here today," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "What happened that night was unacceptable, and it's my responsibility to ensure this restaurant becomes a place where everyone feels valued. We're not just making changes for appearances. We're making changes because it's the right thing to do." He looked at his staff, his expression firm. "This is just the beginning. We'll continue to learn, to grow, and to hold ourselves accountable. And I expect every one of you to be part of that process." As the employees began to leave, some approached Michelle to thank her. The maitre d' lingered behind, his posture stiff as he hesitated near the door. Finally, he approached her. "Ms. Anderson," he said, his voice low, "I want to apologize. I didn't realize how my actions could affect someone. I was wrong." Michelle studied him for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging it is the first step. Now it's about what you do next." He nodded solemnly before walking away. Later, as Michelle drove home, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The day had been draining, but it had also been meaningful. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but today had been a start, a small victory in the larger battle for equity and inclusion. Michelle allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She had turned her pain into purpose, and in doing so, she had planted a seed of change. Now it was up to Étoile Bistro, and society as a whole, to let it grow. The ripple effect. A week had passed since the training session at Étoile Bistro, and Michelle Anderson found herself reflecting on the experience. The weight of what had transpired there was undeniable. For once, she felt as though the seeds of change had been planted in a meaningful way, but as a lawyer and realist, she knew that true progress would take time and consistent effort. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was an email from Claire Davis, the journalist who had covered her story. Subject: "The article is live. Hi Michelle. I wanted to let you know that the article about your experience at Étoile Bistro and the subsequent training session is now live on our platform. The piece has already started gaining traction, and I've included links to Equity Alliance's resources, as well as a call to action for businesses to examine their own practices. If you're comfortable, I'd love to do a follow-up piece in the coming weeks to explore the broader implications of your work and the impact it's had on the community. Vest. Claire." Michelle clicked on the link to the article. The headline was straightforward but impactful. "A lawyer's stand against discrimination sparks change at local restaurant." The article began with an account of the night Michelle had been denied service, painting a vivid picture of her dignity in the face of bias. It transitioned into a thoughtful analysis of the training session and the efforts being made by Henry Wallace and his team to address implicit bias. Claire had also included quotes from Vanessa Morales, emphasizing the importance of systemic change. Michelle scrolled through the comments section cautiously. To her relief, the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Readers expressed admiration for her approach and shared their own experiences with discrimination. Some wrote about how her story had inspired them to speak out or reflect on their own biases. However, not all the feedback was constructive. Scattered among the supportive messages were comments accusing Michelle of overreacting or questioning the legitimacy of her claims. She sighed but reminded herself that progress often came with resistance. Her goal wasn't to win everyone over. It was to create a conversation that couldn't be ignored. The next morning, Michelle's phone rang. It was Vanessa Morales. "Michelle, have you seen the news?" Vanessa asked, her voice buzzing with excitement. "I just read Claire's article," Michelle replied. "It's a great piece." "Not just that," Vanessa said. "Since the article went live, I've been inundated with calls and emails from local businesses asking about our training programs. Your story struck a nerve, and now people are paying attention." Michelle felt a spark of hope. "That's incredible, Vanessa. It's exactly what I was hoping for. A ripple effect." "It's more than a ripple," Vanessa said. "It's turning into a wave. I even heard from a restaurant association that wants to sponsor anti-bias training for its members. And guess who's asking for a partnership? Étoile Bistro. Henry Wallace reached out to me this morning, saying he wants to make training a permanent part of their onboarding process." Michelle smiled, feeling a sense of validation. Henry's commitment was proof that her efforts hadn't been in vain. Later that afternoon, Michelle received another unexpected call, this time from the dean of her alma mater, Eastbrook Law School. "Michelle," the dean began warmly, "I just read the article about your work. I can't tell you how proud we are to call you one of our own." "Thank you," Michelle said, surprised. "We're hosting a diversity and inclusion symposium next month, and I'd like to invite you to be a keynote speaker," the dean continued. "Your story is powerful, and I think our students and the legal community could benefit greatly from hearing it." Michelle hesitated for a moment, the idea of sharing her story on such a large platform both exciting and daunting. But then she thought about the young lawyers who might be inspired by her journey. "I'd be honored," she said finally. Over the next few weeks, the ripple effect continued to grow. Michelle's inbox was flooded with messages from people across the country who had read Claire's article. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, while others sought advice on how to address similar issues in their workplaces or communities. One email in particular stood out. It was from a young woman named Jasmine, a college student studying hospitality management. Subject: "Thank you for inspiring me. Dear Ms. Anderson, I read about your experience at Étoile Bistro, and I just wanted to thank you. As a young black woman studying hospitality, I've often felt out of place in a field where people like me are underrepresented. Your story gave me hope that I can make a difference, not just as a future manager, but as someone who can create spaces where everyone feels welcome. Thank you for your courage and for using your voice to inspire change. Sincerely, Jasmine." Michelle felt a lump in her throat as she read the email. It reminded her why she had chosen to fight for change in the first place. One evening, Michelle returned to Étoile Bistro, this time by invitation. Henry Wallace had asked her to join him for dinner to discuss the progress his team was making. When she arrived, she noticed a subtle but significant difference in the atmosphere. The staff greeted her warmly, and the maitre, the same man who had dismissed her weeks earlier, personally escorted her to a prime table near the window. "Ms. Anderson, welcome back," he said, his tone genuinely respectful. As she sat down, Henry joined her, a folder in hand. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice tinged with both gratitude and humility. I wanted to share some updates with you." He opened the folder, revealing feedback forms from the staff. Many had written about how the training session had opened their eyes and made them more aware of their biases. "We've also implemented a new hiring policy," Henry continued. "We're actively recruiting staff from diverse backgrounds to better reflect our city's community. And we've started hosting monthly workshops to keep these conversations going." Michelle was impressed. "This is a strong start, Henry. I hope you'll continue to build on it." "I will," he said, "and I owe much of this to you. Thank you for holding us accountable." As Michelle left the restaurant that evening, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road to equality was long and often exhausting, but moments like these made the journey worthwhile. Her work wasn't done. Far from it. But for the first time in a long while, she felt as though real change was within reach. And Michelle Anderson was determined to keep pushing forward. For herself, for her community, and for the countless others who deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. The ripple effect. As Michelle walked to her car, the crisp night air filled her lungs, and the lights of the city twinkled around her. Tonight's meeting with Henry Wallace had been a pivotal moment. It wasn't just about the changes at Titol Bistro. It was about what those changes represented. A commitment to growth, accountability, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. She unlocked her car and slid into the driver's seat, pausing for a moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, and she saw another email notification. It was from Equity Alliance. Subject: an incredible opportunity. Michelle opened the email. "Dear Ms. Anderson, we've been thrilled by the attention your story has brought to our work. It's opened doors we never thought possible. We've recently been contacted by a national restaurant chain that wants to implement our training programs in all of their locations. They cited your efforts at Détoile Bistro as the inspiration for their decision. We'd like to invite you to join us as a guest speaker for the first training session. Your presence would be invaluable in helping to bridge the gap between personal stories and actionable change. Please let us know if you're interested. Best regards, Vanessa Morales, Director, Equity Alliance." Michelle couldn't help but smile. The impact of her actions was spreading far beyond her initial intentions. It was one thing to change the culture at a single restaurant, but the thought of influencing an entire chain was something she hadn't anticipated. She quickly typed a response. "Vanessa, thank you for this opportunity. I'd be honored to participate. Please let me know the details, and I'll make it work. Warm regards, Michelle." The following days were a whirlwind. The national restaurant chain announced its partnership with Equity Alliance, and Claire Davis published a follow-up article detailing the expansion of the initiative. The story caught the attention of several media outlets, and soon Michelle was fielding interview requests from local news stations, podcasts, and even a national morning show. Michelle was initially hesitant about stepping into the spotlight, but Sarah, her paralegal, convinced her otherwise. "Michelle, people need to hear your story," Sarah said firmly. "This isn't about self-promotion. It's about inspiring others and showing them what's possible when we speak up." Sarah was right. Michelle agreed to do a few interviews, carefully choosing platforms that aligned with her values. One morning, Michelle found herself seated on the set of a national morning show, the bright studio lights making her feel both exposed and empowered. The host, a charismatic woman with an easy smile, introduced her to the audience. Today, we're joined by Michelle Anderson, a civil rights attorney who turned a personal experience of discrimination into a movement for change. The host began. "Michelle, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me," Michelle replied, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. The host guided her through the story, what had happened at Détoile Bistro, the training session, and the broader impact that followed. "What stands out to me," the host said, "is how you turned such a painful experience into something constructive. What motivated you to take that approach?" Michelle paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think it comes down to a belief that change is possible, but it requires effort and patience. My experience at the restaurant wasn't unique. Many people face similar treatment every day. I had the privilege of a platform and resources to address it, and I felt a responsibility to use them. This isn't just about me. It's about creating a society where everyone is treated with dignity, no matter who they are. The host nodded, her expression thoughtful. You've sparked a national conversation. What do you hope people take away from your story? I hope people realize that change starts with awareness, Michelle said. Whether you're an individual, a business owner, or part of a larger institution, we all have a role to play in dismantling bias. It's not always easy, but it's necessary. And it starts with listening, really listening, to the experiences of others. The host smiled. Powerful words. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing your story and for the work you're doing. As the segment ended, Michelle felt a wave of relief and accomplishment. This was bigger than she had ever imagined, and it was only the beginning. Back at her office, Michelle reviewed the overwhelming response to the interview. Emails, social media messages, and even handwritten letters poured in from people across the country. One message in particular caught her eye. It was from a small business owner in a rural town. Dear Ms. Anderson, I own a small cafe in a town where diversity isn't something we talk about often. Your story opened my eyes to the ways I might be failing my customers without even realizing it. I've reached out to Equity Alliance to schedule a training for my staff. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to do better. With gratitude, Linda Bennett. Michelle felt a lump in her throat. This was why she did what she did. For the Lindas of the world, for the Jasmines, and for every person who had ever felt unseen or unwelcome. That evening, Michelle received a call from Henry Wallace. Michelle, I wanted to give you an update, he said. Since the training session, we've seen a noticeable shift in our team's attitude. Staff members are communicating better, and we're hearing positive feedback from customers. It's like a weight has been lifted. That's wonderful to hear, Michelle said sincerely. There's one more thing, Henry added. I've decided to start a scholarship fund for students studying hospitality management, with a focus on underrepresented groups. It's a small step, but I hope it can help bring more diversity into our industry. Michelle was momentarily speechless. Henry, that's incredible. Thank you for taking this so seriously. It's the least I can do, he said, and it's all thanks to you. As Michelle ended the call, she sat in quiet reflection. What had started as a painful moment of exclusion had grown into something far greater than she ever expected. The ripple effect was no longer just a ripple, it was a tide, carrying with it the promise of progress. And Michelle was determined to ride that tide, pushing forward until dignity, equity, and inclusion became the norm, not the exception. Her work wasn't finished, but she felt ready for whatever came next. After all, change didn't happen overnight. It happened step by step, one ripple at a time. From momentum to movement. Michelle Anderson had spent weeks immersed in the whirlwind of her growing movement. What began as a personal moment of indignity had transformed into a campaign for awareness and systemic change. Her calendar was now filled with meetings, speaking engagements, and consultations. The once intimate fight to address bias at D'Etoile Bistro had rippled out to a larger audience, touching lives she never thought she'd reach. But for every victory, Michelle knew there were deeper battles ahead. One morning, she sat in her office, sifting through an ever-growing pile of messages. Sarah, her paralegal, walked in with a clipboard and a concerned expression. Michelle, you've got a new request, Sarah began. It's from the City Council. They want you to lead a workshop on combating discrimination in public spaces, cafes, retail stores, public transportation. Apparently, they've been following your story and think you'd be the perfect person to spearhead a citywide initiative. Michelle's eyebrows shot up. Citywide initiative. That's a lot. Sarah smiled. It is. But if anyone can do it, it's you. Michelle leaned back in her chair, the weight of the request settling on her. It was a massive undertaking, but it aligned perfectly with the vision she was beginning to shape. For years, she had worked tirelessly in the courtroom, fighting for justice case by case. Now she had the chance to address the root causes of the injustices she saw every day. "I'll do it," she said finally. "Let's set up a meeting with the council." A week later, Michelle found herself in a conference room at City Hall. The council members greeted her warmly, their gratitude evident. The council chair, a woman named Evelyn Carter, spoke first. "Ms. Anderson, your work has inspired not just this city but people across the country. We've all read the articles, watched the interviews, and seen the impact you're making. We believe it's time to take a proactive approach to addressing bias in our community, and we'd like your help in leading the way." Michelle nodded, taking in the gravity of the moment. "I'm honored to help. But if we're going to do this, it has to be more than a surface-level initiative. We need to engage businesses, schools, and community leaders. This has to be a partnership." Evelyn smiled. "That's exactly what we were hoping to hear. We've allocated funding for training programs and public awareness campaigns. We'd also like to create a task force to oversee the implementation of these initiatives. Would you consider chairing it?" The room fell silent as Michelle considered the offer. Chairing a task force meant long hours and additional responsibilities, but it also meant having the authority to drive meaningful change. "I accept," she said, her voice firm. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Michelle assembled a team of advocates, educators, and local leaders to form the task force. They met regularly, brainstorming strategies to address bias in the city's public spaces. Their work culminated in a comprehensive plan that included mandatory training for public-facing employees, a public awareness campaign titled "Welcome to All," and a hotline for reporting incidents of discrimination. The Welcome to All campaign launched with posters, billboards, and social media ads featuring diverse individuals and families. The tagline read, "Our city is for everyone. Let's keep it that way." Michelle's favorite part of the campaign was the series of community workshops held in neighborhoods across the city. These sessions provided a safe space for residents to share their experiences and learn about implicit bias. Michelle personally led several workshops, using her story to spark conversations and inspire action. One evening, after a particularly impactful workshop, Michelle received a call from Jasmine, the young hospitality student who had written to her weeks earlier. "Ms. Anderson, I just wanted to thank you again," Jasmine said, her voice filled with excitement. "Because of your story, I've been inspired to take action in my own way. I started a student group at my college to address bias in the hospitality industry. We're calling it the Open Table Initiative." Michelle felt a swell of pride. "That's incredible, Jasmine. You're taking a stand, and that's how real change begins." Jasmine hesitated. "There's one more thing. We're organizing a panel discussion next month on inclusivity in the industry. It would mean the world to us if you could be our keynote speaker." Michelle's schedule was packed, but she couldn't say no to Jasmine. "I'd be honored," she said. Meanwhile, the changes at D'Etoile Bistro continued to progress. Henry Wallace invited Michelle to review the results of their ongoing efforts. She visited the restaurant and was struck by how different the atmosphere felt. The staff seemed genuinely engaged, and the dining room was filled with a diverse mix of patrons. Henry greeted her with a warm handshake. "Michelle, thank you for coming. I wanted you to see how far we've come." He showed her a binder filled with staff feedback and customer testimonials. Many patrons had noticed the changes and expressed appreciation for the restaurant's commitment to inclusivity. "We've also started donating a portion of our profits to local organizations that support racial equity," Henry added. "It's just one more way we're trying to make a difference." Michelle was impressed. "You've come a long way, Henry. This is what true accountability looks like." As the months went on, the impact of Michelle's work grew. The city council's initiatives gained national attention, and other cities began reaching out to replicate the model. Jasmine's Open Table Initiative expanded to other colleges, creating a network of young activists determined to make the hospitality industry more inclusive. But perhaps the most rewarding moments came from the individuals who approached Michelle to share how her story had touched their lives. Parents told her how they used her example to teach their children about empathy and respect. Business owners shared how they had re-examined their practices. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her for being a voice for change. One night, as Michelle sat in her living room, reviewing notes for an upcoming speech, Sarah called her. "Michelle, you're not going to believe this," Sarah said, her voice brimming with excitement. "You've been nominated for the city's Humanitarian of the Year award." Michelle was stunned. "Me? I didn't even know I was being considered." "Well, you are," Sarah said. "And honestly, you deserve it." Michelle smiled, feeling a mix of humility and gratitude. The award wasn't just a recognition of her efforts, it was a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and the belief that one voice could spark a movement. As she prepared for the award ceremony, Michelle thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The humiliation she had felt that night at D'Etoile Bistro had been transformed into a catalyst for something far greater. What started as one person's stand against discrimination had grown into a community-wide movement, and it was still gaining momentum. She knew the work wasn't finished. It never would be. But as she stood before the mirror, adjusting her jacket and preparing to face the world again, Michelle felt ready. For every challenge ahead, there would be new opportunities to create change, and she would rise to meet them, just as she always had. A legacy of change. The night of the city's Humanitarian of the Year award ceremony was nothing short of magical. The grand hall where the event was held shimmered with golden light, and the air buzzed with the excitement of the attendees. Dressed in an elegant evening gown, Michelle Anderson felt an unusual mixture of nerves and pride as she arrived. This wasn't just an award for her. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, and for everyone who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or made to feel invisible. As she stepped onto the red carpet leading to the entrance, cameras flashed, and reporters clamored for her attention. Michelle wasn't used to this level of public recognition, but she handled the questions with grace, always steering the conversation back to the broader mission of equity and inclusion. Inside the hall, she was greeted by familiar faces. Vanessa Morales from Equity Alliance, Henry Wallace from D'Etoile Bistro, Jasmine from the Open Table Initiative, and even Evelyn Carter, the city council chair. Each of them had played a role in the movement Michelle had ignited, and their presence felt like a validation of her work. The program began with speeches from community leaders and previous award recipients, each one highlighting the importance of service, resilience, and unity. Michelle listened attentively, her mind drifting occasionally to the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the countless hours spent in courtrooms, the sleepless nights spent drafting plans, and the moments of doubt that had threatened to hold her back. Yet here she was, a testament to perseverance. When her name was finally announced as the award recipient, the applause was thunderous. Michelle rose from her seat, her heart pounding as she made her way to the stage. As she stood at the podium, the weight of the moment settled over her. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Thank you," Michelle started, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "I am deeply humbled to receive this honor tonight, but I want to make it clear, this award is not just about me. It's about all of us. It's about the power of community, of standing together, and of refusing to accept the status quo." She paused, scanning the room. "When I walked into D'Etoile Bistro that night, I didn't expect my life to change. I didn't expect to be denied service, and I certainly didn't expect that experience to spark a movement. But life has a way of presenting us with opportunities disguised as challenges, and in those moments, we have a choice: to retreat in silence or to stand up and speak out." The audience hung on her every word. What happened to me that night wasn't unique. It was a reflection of a larger problem, one that affects people every day in ways big and small. Discrimination doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers in the form of assumptions, biases, or unspoken rules about who belongs and who doesn't. Michelle's voice grew stronger, But here's the good news. Change is possible. When we confront these issues with honesty and courage, when we choose education over ignorance and action over complacency, we can create a better world. And it starts with each of us. She gestured toward the audience. I've seen this firsthand. I've seen businesses like Etoile Bistro transform their culture. I've seen young people like Jasmine start initiatives that inspire others. I've seen community leaders like Vanessa Morales and Evelyn Carter fight tirelessly for inclusion. And I've seen ordinary people stand up and say, enough is enough. That's the power of collective action. Michelle took a deep breath. I accept this award not as a culmination of my journey, but as a reminder that the work is far from over. There is still so much to do, but tonight I am filled with hope. Hope that we can continue to build on what we've started and create a legacy of change that will endure for generations. She smiled, her voice softening. To everyone who has supported me, challenged me, and walked this path with me, thank you. This award belongs to all of you. Let's keep going. The room erupted into applause, and Michelle felt tears prick her eyes as she stepped away from the podium. She had poured her heart into that speech, and the response was overwhelming. After the ceremony, the networking portion of the evening began. Michelle mingled with the attendees, many of whom approached her to share their stories or offer their gratitude. One conversation, in particular, stood out. An older man with graying hair and a kind smile introduced himself. Ms. Anderson, my name is Robert Grayson. I'm the CEO of a national chain of hotels, and I've been following your work. Your story has inspired me to take a hard look at our company's practices. I'd like to invite you to consult with us on a new inclusivity initiative we're launching. Michelle shook his hand, impressed. Thank you, Mr. Grayson. I'd be happy to help. It's encouraging to see leaders like you stepping up. It's the least I can do, he said earnestly. Your courage has reminded me that change starts at the top. As the evening wound down, Michelle found herself sitting with Jasmine and Vanessa at a quiet corner table. They reflected on how far they had come and the unexpected ways their lives had intertwined. Do you ever feel like this is just the beginning? Jasmine asked, her eyes shining with youthful optimism. Michelle smiled. It is. Movements don't end with awards or initiatives. They grow, evolve, and inspire others to take up the cause. What we've started here is bigger than any one of us. Vanessa nodded, and it's a reminder that even the smallest actions, like speaking up or leaving a business card, can have a ripple effect. The three women shared a quiet moment of understanding, bound by their shared commitment to justice and equity. When Michelle returned home that night, she placed the Humanitarian of the Year award on her mantle. It joined her other accolades, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a symbol of her accomplishments. It was a reminder of the lives she had touched and the change she had sparked. As she gazed at the award, her mind filled with ideas for the future. She thought about creating a nonprofit organization to expand the work she had started, about mentoring young lawyers and activists, and about continuing to use her voice to challenge systems of inequality. Michelle Anderson knew the road ahead would be long, but she also knew it would be worth every step. Because in the fight for justice, the journey itself was the reward, and she was ready for whatever came next.